You could call this morning's guest Your Honor, Colonel, Professor, Chief Judge, philanthropist, entrepreneur, so many others. I'm just going to call him Dad. Meet Robinson Everett, coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at East of Chicago Pizza here at 40th Avenue North and Kings Highway in Myrtle Beach. We're focused on part 2 of Robinson Oscar Everett. Good morning, my father. That's right, my father. How about this amazing, for folks who weren't with us yesterday, to get a sense of East of Chicago Pizza. This place is games, fun for everyone.
Oh, these pizzas are going to be great to eat today.
I know. We're going to have to stay around for lunch. And, of course, I hope you'll be willing to come back with us tomorrow as well, Dad. We've got a three-peat of Robinson Oscar Everett. Of course, yesterday you were sharing with us as we wrapped up a couple of amazing instances of your father and taking on pretty difficult cases in the past before his death in 1971. I think you were sharing one with us that was particularly interesting, and unfortunately we ran out of time.
Well, let me ask a couple of things beforehand. First, if I'm here tomorrow, can I get some more pizza here?
Absolutely. With 3 days of pizza. Yesterday's pizza was incredible. Their pizza bar and salad bar are incredible.
Yeah. Then secondly, I couldn't remember the name of the coach at Yale.
Right.
Who was a heavy guy who we challenged to the eating contest.
Yeah.
I think it was Herman Hickman.
Herman Hickman.
I believe.
Herman Hickman. And you said he had formerly been a coach at NC State.
I think he was an assistant coach there.
Right.
But,
and so you and your law school roommate challenged him. For viewers who weren't with us yesterday, he had supposedly had the claim
could
eat more than any two men, and you and your roommate took him on, and he never showed up.
He never accepted the invitation.
That's right.
We were hoping we'd get a great meal at an elite Boston restaurant, but it didn't happen.
Well, that's okay. You tried, yeah.
But let me go back, sort of finish things off about my dad. He handled some very difficult cases, and I think he was an outstanding trial lawyer. But in addition, as a legislator...
he served in the North Carolina legislature for how long?
5 different terms.
5 terms, wow.
And he showed courage there. The thing that particularly comes to mind concerns the Ku Klux Klan and the anti-masking, anti-hooding law. Sometime back, I guess, in the 1910 to 20 period, along in that general period,
right.
He was in his office, in his law office, and some people came to the office, and the secretary came in and said, "Mr. Everett, there's some people who want to talk to you." So he said, "Send them in." These men come in, and they say, "Everett, you're in the General Assembly. We're for the KKK, for the Ku Klux Klan. We understand that the General Assembly is thinking about having an anti-hooding statute, preventing us from wearing masks. And we want you to know, if you support that, your political career is at an end. You're in the General Assembly now. You won't be after that." And my father, as he recited to me, was very offended. And he said, "You're nothing but a bunch of thugs coming here telling me this." So I never heard of this legislation. But now that you've told me about it, I'm going to get more details, and I will introduce it. So that was his approach. If he thought people were pushing things for the wrong reasons or in the wrong direction, he would push back and push back hard. So he was a wonderful example, and
that's great.
I guess he inspired me to take some cases that were unpopular. One I took to the Supreme Court.
I remember, and when the News and Observer did a big piece about you back in the mid-'90s, highlighting your goal, albeit it's potentially a very tough goal, but your goal of a colorblind society. And they did a big write-up on you as the Tar Heel of the Week, which is great. As you know, the Herald does a lot of weekly profiles and profiles of people. We could probably do one like that, but the News and Observer there in Raleigh does their Tar Heel of the Week. And I remember when you got it one year, and of course they had the chancellor at North Carolina Central University, Julius Chambers, speaking about you, highlighting that your goal is a potentially a very important one, but his perception was that would be a difficult one to achieve, and that the way you'd taken it on in fighting against racial gerrymandering was one that he did not agree with.
No, he did not agree with it.
He did not agree with it. You know, I saw an award you'd gotten back in 2004 from the North Carolina Bar Association, the Judge John J. Parker Award, and it was amazing as Norfleet Jones, I believe, or Norfleet, somebody was reading out your amazing accomplishments, but he highlighted that in an earlier year, one of the more exciting meetings at the North Carolina Bar Association was when you and former Chancellor Chambers, who'd also received the Judge Parker Award in years prior, had debated each other as to the merits of racial gerrymandering in North Carolina and nationwide. And of course, I think he also took you on in the U.S. Supreme Court, Chancellor Chambers, Julius Chambers there, as he argued on behalf of the NAACP, supporting racial gerrymandering. Of course, again, I think you all had known each other for a long time. It was amazing hearing him talk about a colorblind society and his views, the practical side potentially, and your views as a pursuit for a colorblind society. What prompted that, Dad? Was it your parents?
Well, I think it dated back to 1966, when I'd been involved in some redistricting litigation in the North Carolina, in the federal courts in North Carolina. This was because of a gerrymander that was designed to assure the election or the retention in office of particular members of Congress, actually a particular member. And I thought that was the wrong thing, and I helped a potential candidate who was being gerrymandered out. I helped him by starting a lawsuit attacking that system. And although we didn't win, we did at least get a decision where they were going to change the redistricting in the future, and there were references to compactness and contiguousness as important criteria. So in 1992, right after my mother died, I became aware of the tremendous gerrymander, the racial gerrymander, that had been undertaken by the North Carolina General Assembly. And when I saw the map of what had been done, I thought, this just isn't right. You're not supposed to create districts to elect either a particular person, as had been done in 1966, pardon me, and you're not supposed to gerrymander racially to assure the election of a person of a particular race. So I thought somebody ought to do something about it. And then I encountered a close friend of mine who had been one of the plaintiffs back in 1966. Yeah. Her name was Ruth Shaw.
Right.
Wonderful person, a widow who lost her husband in a tragic accident.
Oh, yeah.
I knew her very well. And we were talking very briefly right after my mother died. It was
I remember. I think at
the wake.
At the wake, right.
And I'm shaking hands with people as they go through the line. And we had a little conversation. Ruth said something like, they're doing this all over again. And I said, yeah, it's very, very bad. Somebody ought to do something about it. And then one of the other, either she or I, said, well, we'll do something about it. Mm-hmm. And so a few days later, we started a lawsuit where I was one of the plaintiffs. Ruth was the lead plaintiff.
Right.
One of my close colleagues at Duke, Mel Shim,
yes,
who's now deceased, who believed in that concept of avoiding race consciousness, having one society. Mel was a plaintiff. And then, as a matter of fact, my son, Greg Everett, namely you,
right,
were a plaintiff.
And Dorothy Bullock.
My secretary, who worked night and day to get the papers ready.
Right.
She thought, she was a Durham native, she thought it was wrong. And so she decided she would join with us. So the five of us, I won't say the fabulous five, but the five of us went all the way to the Supreme Court. And when we started up there, after losing 2-1 in a federal district court.
There in North Carolina,
right? North Carolina, right. When we started there, I think most people thought we had the chance of a snowball you-know-where. And then the Supreme Court announced that it was going to grant review, and there were filed all sorts of briefs, so-called amici briefs.
Right.
The Republican Party, interestingly enough, came in as an intervener on our side.
Right.
The ACLU on the other side, the American Jewish Congress on our side, as I recall. Anyway, the Democratic Party on the other side, which was a little hard for me to get used to because I'm a traditional Democrat. My mother and dad were traditional Democrats.
Right.
And that they would be fighting opposition on this issue was just heartrending for me. Mm-hmm. But it was a great experience. So I've tried to follow the example of my mother and dad, particularly my dad, by taking cases that might be unpopular, but where you try to do the right thing. And people deserve counsel. I've tried to help with programs to provide legal assistance to underdogs of various types.
What was the name, the South Carolinian who had worked for President Bush at the time in the Justice Department, who was in charge of this push to essentially, and it's a terrible thing, but to... and I remember it, what he called it, which is a term I can't use on commercial television, but he worked in the Bush Justice Department, and he wanted, unfortunately in this instance, to pack folks of a certain color so that he would bleach the other districts to benefit Republicans, and it did. It obviously helped dramatically when they took over Congress in '94 because he had bleached the other districts. They had a dramatic shift in North Carolina where there had been 8 Democrats and 3 Republicans to becoming 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats because of Eva Clayton and Mel Watt's 2 districts had taken, unfortunately, all the persons out of spreading them around the state properly, compactly, and instead taking 160-mile-long district. So it was a Republican push there by President Bush at that time's, what was the name of the guy from South Carolina?
I don't recall.
I can't remember, who spearheaded that to bleach all the districts to give them to Republicans, essentially.
Well, the summary was pack blacks, bleach whites. And that had some dramatic political consequences, but it was basically wrong. And the interesting thing is there apparently had been a change in the Republican...
Lee Atwater.
What?
Was it Lee Atwater?
That's right.
Lee Atwater.
Lee Atwater was involved.
Was the Palmetto State guy who worked for the Bush Justice Department to pack those districts or to bleach the other.
Yeah, and there was a change in philosophy, and as of 1993-94, when, of course, the Clinton administration had taken over, it's ironic, the Republican Party was on our side.
I know. And
the Democratic Party was filing briefs on the other side. So things take a strange turn sometimes. But it was interesting, and I think we did the right thing. So, and we were up at the Supreme Court 4 times.
Amazing.